He had fought for his country, risking everything on distant battlefields, and now lay dead, honored by a soldier's farewell. Flags fluttered in the wind, the air thick with sorrow, and families gathered to mourn the ultimate sacrifice. Yet at his own funeral, a police officer stepped forward, blocking the procession, turning grief into confrontation and respect into outrage. Gasps filled the air, whispers of disbelief rippled through the crowd, and hearts pounded with anger and confusion. How could a man who gave his life for his nation be met with such blatant disrespect? Cameras captured the moment, and the story spread like wildfire. One question burned through the tension, impossible to ignore. Who would defend a hero when even death couldn't guarantee dignity? And as the world watched, the answers seemed as uncertain as the outrage itself. He was more than a soldier. He was a son, a father, a man who had given his life for a country that now celebrated him with a flag at half-mast. For years, he had followed orders without question, faced danger on distant battlefields, and returned home with nothing but honor and scars no one could see. His life had been disciplined, quiet, filled with routine visits to his family, weekend barbecues, and the soft laughter of children he adored. Friends called him dependable, neighbors respected him, and even strangers nodded in acknowledgement of the uniform he wore with pride. Yet beneath the calm exterior, he had long understood the world's contradictions. He knew that courage on the battlefield didn't always protect you from prejudice at home. The same hands that shook his in thanks could just as easily cross the line of decency. As he prepared for what was supposed to be a dignified farewell, there was an unspoken tension in the air, a subtle unease that something wasn't quite right. Shadows stretched across the cemetery, whispers fluttered between mourners, and the weight of a nation's expectation pressed down on him even in death. He was about to learn that honor and sacrifice did not always guarantee respect, and that even heroes could face injustice when they were most vulnerable. The funeral began like any other, with solemn music, folded flags, and the quiet hum of mourning. Friends, family, and fellow soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, each carrying grief heavy on their chests. The casket was draped in the nation's colors, a symbol of honor, sacrifice, and duty fulfilled. Yet, as the procession moved forward, a figure appeared where no one expected him. A police officer, his expression unreadable, his stance rigid. At first, it seemed like a mere formality, another uniformed presence keeping order. But the air shifted instantly. The officer's gaze was not one of respect. It was calculating, cold, and confrontational. Families stiffened, whispers spread like wildfire, and a chill passed over the mourners. Mothers clutched their children, veterans straightened in silent defiance, and the weight of disbelief pressed down on everyone. The officer stepped closer, blocking the path as if questioning the right of this fallen hero to be honored. Hearts raced. Cameras clicked. The casket bearers faltered for a fraction of a second, enough to make the moment unbearable. How could someone so devoted to justice and protection behave this way to a man who had risked his life for every citizen? Time seemed to stretch, each second heavier than the last. The mourner's grief collided with mounting anger, and tension hung like a storm cloud over the cemetery. Friends exchanged glances that asked unspoken questions. Who could intervene? Who could stop this injustice? Each step of the officer brought more unease, every gesture magnified by the silence of those who dared not act too quickly. And yet the crowd could feel it. This was more than a breach of decorum. It was a challenge to every moral code, a direct affront to the life and honor of a man who had given everything. Then came the moment that sent a shiver through everyone present. The officer raised his hand, signaling the procession to halt entirely. Gasps echoed, breaking the somber quiet. A mother's sob caught in her throat. Veterans clenched their fists. The casket bearers froze, hearts pounding. Cameras captured the tension, broadcasting every inch of disbelief, every raw emotion. And somewhere in that chaos, a seed of fury began to grow, a collective, undeniable demand for justice. It was as if time itself held its breath, waiting for the next move. Would someone step forward to confront the officer? Would the mourning families be forced into silence, their grief trampled under prejudice? And in the midst of all this, one truth became painfully clear. This was no accident, no misunderstanding. This confrontation was deliberate. It was a test, a public display of power against someone who could not defend himself. And as the crowd watched, hearts hammering and minds racing, everyone knew that what happened next would determine whether honor, respect, and justice could survive or be shattered in a single, shocking moment. The cemetery had transformed into a battlefield of grief and outrage. Every mourner's heartbeat echoed like a drum, each breath tight with tension. The officer stood like a wall, unyielding and deliberate, his gaze fixed on the casket as if daring anyone to question him. The weight of his presence pressed on everyone, twisting sorrow into anger. Families trembled, clutching one another, soldiers' jaws tightened, and whispers of disbelief rippled through the crowd. It wasn't just disrespect, it was a challenge. A public display of power aimed at someone who had given everything for his country. The casket bearers faltered for a moment, the polished wood heavy in their hands, and the crowd felt it. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally, each second a reminder that even in death, respect was not guaranteed. Cameras flashed, capturing the humiliation in real time, forcing the world to witness what had always been too easy to ignore: the fragility of dignity when confronted with prejudice. The officer's motions were calculated, deliberate. Every step and gesture reinforced a cruel truth. No act of heroism could shield a black man from systemic injustice. Then came the unbearable moment. The officer raised his hand, signaling the procession to halt completely. Gasps erupted. Mothers clutched children, veterans stiffened, and friends exchanged glances loaded with fury. The casket bearers froze mid-step, hands trembling under the weight of the fallen soldier. Murmurs surged into a tide of outrage, every eye fixed on the confrontation, hearts pounding with helplessness and disbelief. How could the life of a man who had sacrificed everything be treated with such blatant contempt? And then, just as the tension threatened to snap, a distant sound pierced the air. Sirens wailed. Voices shouted. A figure emerged at the edge of the crowd. The possibility of intervention or further conflict hung in the balance, electrifying the atmosphere. The mourners held their collective breath, trapped between fear and hope. In that moment, the world seemed to pause. It was a turning point, the ultimate test. Would dignity be restored, or would injustice leave its mark forever? For one fleeting instant, grief, anger, and hope collided, suspended in a tense heartbeat. And as everyone watched, unable to look away, one truth was undeniable. The next moment would decide everything. The tension finally broke as the world watched, hearts still pounding from the confrontation. News of the officer's actions spread like wildfire, igniting outrage and demanding accountability. Within hours, the officer was suspended, removed from duty, a stark reminder that even those in power are not above scrutiny. The soldier's family, though still grieving, felt a measure of vindication, knowing that the sacrifice of their loved one had forced a nation to confront its own prejudices. Then came a call that no one could have anticipated: the President of the United States, personally reaching out to express condolences, acknowledge the injustice, and reaffirm the country's debt to the fallen hero. The gesture was symbolic, yet powerful, a moment where grief met recognition and courage met accountability. It was a reminder that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, justice can prevail, and voices silenced by prejudice can be heard. But the story was bigger than a single call or a suspension. It became a mirror reflecting the harsh reality that racial injustice persists, even against those who have served their nation with honor. Families, soldiers, and citizens alike were reminded that dignity cannot be assumed. It must be demanded, defended, and protected. And while one officer faced consequences, millions still face similar indignities every day. Their lives and sacrifices overlooked or dismissed. The nation mourned, reflected, and debated. But one question lingered long after the flags were lowered and the cameras turned away. How many heroes? How many ordinary lives must endure humiliation and prejudice before respect is guaranteed for all? The fallen soldier's story became a call to action, a reminder that honor and courage deserve more than words. They demand justice, accountability, and a society willing to confront its own failings.